Hi, grade 6. This is the math video for pages 570 and 571. It is my opinion that we need to spend one more day reviewing how to add positive integers, how to add negative integers, how to add positive integers to negative integers, and how to add negative integers to positive integers, and finally, how to use the rule about subtraction. Now, today, you should receive a sheet that looks like this. And you will notice as you look at it, the top three rules are just rules about adding. And then, right about here, there's a rule about subtraction. So I'll be referring to these rules as we go through this lesson. Also, you'll notice that your assignment today is 570 and 571. Some problems on both of those pages, and I'm going to do a bunch of similar problems to what you see there. Hopefully you can stay with me on that. I'm on 570. I'm looking at lesson 3-4, 570 3-4, and I'm looking at problems numbers 1 through 12, which is going to be your assignment. Okay? I'm going to do one similar to problem 1. What if instead of -4 plus 8, we had -4 plus 10. Which rule would I use on this sheet? Well, hopefully you recognize that I've got a negative being added to a positive. So this would be that three-step rule situation where I think about their absolute values. That's step 1. And then I subtract the smaller one from the bigger one. That's step 2. And now I've got an answer of 6. But the question is it positive or negative 6? Well, which one of these had the bigger absolute value? Or, remember that other method we thought about? What if I put down 4 negatives and 10 positives? And then I group together a positive with a negative until I run out? What am I left with? I'm left with 6 positives, aren't I? Because 10 has the bigger absolute value, that's why we end up with extra positives. So this answer's got to be a positive 6. Remember that? Okay, let's try one like number 2. Oh, that's easy. 12 plus 15. They're just positive numbers, so we add them together and we get 27. How about something like number 3? -8 plus a -10. Those are 2 negative numbers. So that's that second blue rule. Second blue rule. When you're adding 2 negatives, you just add them. A negative plus a negative is a negative. How about number 4? Number 4 says -9 plus a -6. I'm going to do -9 plus a -4. Again, this is that second rule. All I'm doing is adding 2 negative numbers, so I just add them. -13. How about problem number 5? Problem number 5 says -18 plus -11. I'm going to change this 11 to, how about 23? No. Sorry. I'm going to change it to 7. Okay, this is the third rule. How do I know it's the third rule? Because I'm adding a negative to a positive. A negative to a positive, or a positive to a negative. We do that 3-step rule thing, where we think about their absolute values, we subtract the numbers, and then we have to decide, is it going to be positive or negative? Well, one way to do it is, I could write 7 positives here, right? And then I could write 18 negatives. That's a lot of negatives. Which one's going to have negatives or positives left over? Isn't it obvious? There's going to be no more negatives left over. Now, the way the rule states it, the rule says which one has the bigger absolute value, and this one does. So we share its answer with, or we share its sign, the negative sign, with our answer, and so we get -11. How about something like number 6? They have -36 plus a positive 40. I'm going to change this to -31 plus a positive 40. Again, this is that third rule on that sheet I gave you because I'm adding a negative to a positive. So I'm going to think about their absolute values. I'm going to subtract them, and when I do that, I get 9. And now I got to ask myself, is it positive 9 or negative 9? Well, which one of these numbers had the bigger absolute value? This one does, so my answer is positive. Or we think about 31 negative symbols and 40 positive symbols. When we pair them all up, what are we going to have left over? We're going to have left over more positives, right? So it's got to be a positive 9. Okay, I'm going to do one more in that section, number 7. Something similar to 7. What about 45 plus a negative 12? This is not number 7, but it's similar to it. Okay, a positive number plus a negative number, that's that 3-step rule again. So we think about their absolute values. So that's step 1 of the 3-step rule. Then we subtract them. I get 33. Okay, is it a positive or negative 33? Step 3 of the 3-step rule says look at their absolute values. Which one had the bigger absolute value? This one did. So I share its sign, positive 45, with my answer. So the answer to this one is positive 33. Or, if you can imagine me writing 45 positive signs here and 12 negative signs here, and then pairing them up, what are we going to be left with? We're going to be left with a bunch of positive signs, right? And so that tells me this is a positive number as well. Okay, now let's switch to the other part of the assignment, which is on the top of 571, and it's lesson 3-5, numbers 1 through 15. Here, we got to figure out how to practice the subtraction rule. So let's start with number 1. Number 1 says 3 minus 7. I'm not going to do that one, but I'll do one similar. How about 3 minus 11? 3 minus 11. Well, on here, it has that subtraction rule. And it says add the opposite of that second number. So I write 3 plus, okay, to subtract, I add the opposite of this. What's the opposite of 11? Negative 11. Okay? And now guess what I got? Now I'm adding a positive to a negative. So now I got to follow the third rule. I went from doing the subtraction rule to now I'm doing the 3-step rule, adding a negative to a positive or a positive to a negative. So I think about their absolute values, and I subtract their absolute values, and I get 8. The big question is that positive 8 or negative 8? The third step of the 3-step rule says that the answer should share the sign with the number that has the bigger absolute value. Does 3 or negative 11 have a bigger absolute value? Well, negative 11 does, so we share its sign with the answer. Or another way to think about it, if I put down 3 positives and 11 negatives, and I pair them up, what am I going to have more of? I'm going to have more negatives, right? So it's got to be negative because of that reason. Okay, let's try number 2. Number 2 says negative 5 minus 4, but I'm not going to do that problem. I'm going to do something a little bit different. What if it was negative 5 minus 1? Negative 5 minus 1. Okay, the rule says to subtract, I add. What do I add? I add the opposite of that second number. What's the opposite of 1? Negative 1. Oh, now which rule should I use? I'm adding a negative to a negative. Isn't that the second adding rule? How do we add 2 negative integers? Yep, we just add them. The answer is negative 6. We're done. We're done with number 2. Let's try number 3. Number 3 says negative 6 minus 2. I'm not going to do that one, but I'm going to do negative 11 minus 2. It's a very similar problem. How do I do subtraction? According to the rule, to subtract, I add. What do I add? I add the opposite of that second number. Hey, now I'm adding 2 negative numbers. Isn't that the second adding rule now? Adding of 2 negative integers? Yes, it is. And the rule says just add them. This is negative 13. Let's try something similar to number 4. Number 4 says 8 minus 13. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do 4 minus 13. Very similar to it. Okay, how do I subtract? To subtract, I add the opposite of the second number. What's the opposite of 13? Negative 13. So I end up with 4 plus a negative 13. Now what do? Well, I'm adding a positive to a negative. So isn't that the third adding rule, the 3-step rule for adding a positive to a negative? Yeah, it is. And the third rule says, take their absolute values, subtract them, and I get some sort of a 9. Now the big question is it going to be positive or negative 9? I go back to those original numbers. Which one had the bigger absolute value? This one did. So that means I'm going to share its sign with my answer. Or I can think about 4 positive symbols and 13 negative symbols. Whew. There's 13 negative symbols. If I pair them all up, am I left with positives or negatives? I'm left with a bunch of negatives. So that's another reason why this answer has to be negative. Okay, let's do one similar to number 5, which says 6 minus a negative 4. I'm not going to do that one. I'm going to do 9 minus a negative 7. 9 minus a negative 7. Very similar problem. How do I subtract according to the rule? I add the opposite of this. What's the opposite of negative 7? Positive 7. And yes, the answer is 16 because I'm just adding 2 positive numbers together. Let's try something similar to number 6. Number 6 says 12 minus 9. I'm not going to do that one. Let's do 14 minus 9. Wait a minute. Do I really need to use the new rule of subtraction on something like this? I don't think so. You've been doing 14 minus 9 since probably 2nd grade, right? What is 14 minus 9? Well, it's 5, isn't it? If you think about your math facts. 5 plus 9 is 14, therefore 14 minus 9 equals 5. Could we solve it using the subtraction rule? Yeah, we could. Watch. To subtract, we add the opposite of the second number. Now we've got a positive plus a negative number, so we use the 3-step rule. We think about their absolute values and we subtract them. And then we have to decide if this is going to be positive or negative. Which one of these had the bigger absolute value? Positive 14, so the answer is 5. Okay. Let's see, what else? How about number 7? Number 7. They've got negative 2 minus 23. I'm going to do negative 4 minus 19. Very similar problem, just slightly different. How do I do it? To subtract, I add. What do I add? I add the opposite of this number, which is this number. And now what rule do I use? Well, I'm adding a negative to a negative, so all I got to do is add. I get, not this problem, we're not doing this one. I get negative 23 when I add them all up. Hopefully this helps you. Thank you, 6th graders. Ask if you have questions.